Hello from Tel Aviv, and you're watching Israel Update, Israel at War. I'm Gadi Taub, and with me is my colleague, Mike Doran. Hi, Mike.
Hi, Gadi.
Mike is a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute and the director of the Center for Peace and Security in the Middle East. It is the first time that an American president is visiting Israel in the midst of a war, and President Biden was greeted with a collective sigh of relief. People were elated. He met many of them. One first responder, for example, who met with the president and described the horrors that he saw, later was interviewed on TV and said of the president cried, really. He choked on his tears. He told us he had 3 children. One of them was killed in a car accident. Together with his wife, another son was killed in Iraq. He said, when I lost my children, I felt what you feel now. I feel your pain. You probably saw the president hug Netanyahu, Prime Minister Netanyahu, warmly on the tarmac, and the presence of 2 American aircraft carriers, the USS Gerald Ford and the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower, served to further reassure Israelis that America has got our back. Pretty soon, relief spilled over into actual euphoria. Hyperbole abound on TV. People described it as a historical visit, a historical moment, something unprecedented. But what was the hard political currency behind the high-flying rhetoric? Mike and I are here to unpack it for you. Over to you, Mike.
Okay, Gadi, here's what we're going to talk about today. First, we're going to talk a little bit more about what you were just talking about. That's the elation and the excitement about Biden's trip. Then, secondly, we're going to talk about what I think is the kind of main hidden story of the week, namely Hezbollah's entry into the war. Hezbollah stepped up this week its participation in the war, and that should be getting much more attention. Third, we're going to talk about the coming ground operation in Gaza and what the president's visit means for the campaign. And finally, we can't end without a few words about the lifting of the restrictions on Iran's ability to buy and sell ballistic missiles and drones, which happened this week with very little attention. I think it's actually another hidden story that deserves more attention than it got, because of what it reveals about American policy. But now let's just say a few more words about, let's go to our first issue here, the excitement about Biden's trip. Biden's trip didn't just receive high marks in Israel, it also got very high marks in the United States. Bret Stephens wrote a column in the New York Times calling it Biden's finest hour. He was filling a moral vacuum, according to Stephens, in Israel and in the United States.
And on Churchillian proportions.
Yes, Churchillian moment. And I can tell you, in the pro-Israel community as well, he's getting very high marks, because it feels like America really has Israel's back at this moment. Makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable, to be honest with you, Gadi, because I don't want to be negative. I don't want to be demoralizing. But like you, I see another side to this that I think people aren't paying attention to. And one senses how much the Israelis want to feel supported and loved at this moment. But I think they have to have their eyes open. I think it's our job to tell them that.
Yeah, and it's difficult with a brewing new front on our north with Hezbollah. Hezbollah has 150,000 rockets pointed at Israel. The estimate is 200,000. There's a 50,000. And is the cliche that this is about the size of or the firepower is about the size of a nuclear bomb?
Well, I don't know. I wouldn't know how to make such a comparison. But look, Hezbollah has a rocket and missile arsenal that is bigger. I don't know where it ranks actually in terms of all nations, but it has a rocket and missile arsenal that's bigger probably than any European country. Maybe 1 or 2 European countries have that many, but it's unprecedented for a paramilitary group to have such capabilities,
and it can be devastating to Israel.
The war, I don't know that people have this in their minds. The coming war between Israel and Hezbollah is going to be the worst war Israel has ever fought. It's going to be more casualties of the Israeli soldiers, but also civilians. This Hezbollah has the ability to take the war to Israeli civilians in a way that they have never experienced before.
And Israelis were partly reassured because the two aircraft carriers were understood to be a guarantee against Hezbollah attack. They also came with a price. It was made clear to Israel that the American support was conditional on Israel not preempting the Hezbollah, which leaves the initiative with Hezbollah and leaves us in a bind. But then we learned that America did not guarantee its participation if indeed Hezbollah started this war. And let me show you, Mike, this video of President Biden, which I actually took from your Twitter feed, so you won't be surprised. Let's watch it.
I think I'm familiar with it.
Any more for the hospital, sir?
May I?
Oh, don't.
May I ask you about, there's a report in the Times of Israel that says Biden officials have indicated to Israel in recent days that if Hezbollah initiates a war against Israel, the U.S. military will join the IDF in fighting the terrorist group.
Not true.
Not true?
That was never said.
Well, there you have it, Gadi. There's no guarantee that the United States is going to enter into the conflict. I think Biden should not have made that statement. It's revealing to us, but he should have fudged it. He should have said, "I prefer not to talk about what was said or not said on that subject," to leave our enemy, that is Iran and Hezbollah, in some doubt about his intentions. He's just reduced the deterrent effect of those. How
do you explain it, Mike?
carriers.
Why would he reduce American deterrence?
Because they have never left the frame. The Biden administration, they have never left the frame of seeking an accommodation with Iran, and they're trying to send a clear message to Iran that they are not hostile to it. And they want to send a clear message to Iran that they are preventing the Israelis from opening up that front.
So they are willing to save their Iran policy at the expense of Israel at this crucial moment.
I wouldn't say it quite like that, although I don't necessarily disagree with that statement.
How would you?
Because at this moment, they aren't necessarily thinking about Iran engagement. That's not the first thing on their mind. The first thing on their mind, that's in the background. It's part of their general conception of the region. Their first goal is to keep the conflict from spiraling out of control. They're afraid of what might happen. And the Israelis themselves, I'm sure the IDF doesn't want the northern front to open up. So everyone is engaged in the signaling that they think is going to prevent the war from breaking out. So the Israelis are being very careful. Every time Hezbollah fires a missile across the border, Israel makes sure to file a missile back across the border that does exactly the same kind of damage that the Hezbollah missile did. So if they kill a person, then if Hezbollah kills a person, then the Israelis will kill a person. If they hit just infrastructure, then Israel will hit just infrastructure.
Which means that proportionality is only useful when you are not in an actual war. When you are in a war, your responses should be disproportional if you want to deter anyone. So
I don't want to. I'm a little. I don't want to tell
the Israelis.
I don't want to tell the Israelis. Yeah, I don't want to tell the Israelis or anyone who's in that situation how to shoot and what to shoot at. I'd prefer just to describe it like I did. Everyone is trying very hard. I'm going to say everyone, the United States and the Israelis, to make sure that this doesn't spiral out of control. Hezbollah, I think, I'm not sure that they want to open a second front, because here's what will happen, Gadi, if they open a second front. Israel will stop everything it's doing in Gaza, and it will move all of its assets north, and many tens of thousands of Lebanese civilians will die. Why? Because Lebanese Hezbollah has put its 200,000 rockets and missiles underneath villages in southern Lebanon, underneath apartment buildings, and so on. There's no way that the Israelis can get at that terrorist infrastructure without killing civilians. Just like in Gaza, exactly the same scenario.
Well, maybe we're teaching them the wrong lessons about Gaza, because in Gaza we keep avoiding hitting citizens. According to international law, if you put rockets under a hospital, we are legally entitled to shoot at the hospital.
We talked about this last night. You're right. Of course, you're right.
Yeah, but I'm saying,
war crime.
It's a war crime. It's a war crime to put weapons inside a hospital. That's the war crime. But but what I'm saying is, we didn't do it. We didn't do it in Gaza, and so are we not sending the message to Hezbollah that they're also safe, because we won't do it elsewhere because we are susceptible to international pressure?
Yes, no, there's a problem. I mean, in Clausewitzian terms, where's the center of gravity of this conflict? Center of gravity is really not in Gaza. The center of gravity is in the north. Is with Hezbollah. That's where Israel wins this war. Well, really, once it actually defeats Iran, but if it defeats Hezbollah, then it has defeated Iran in the Eastern Mediterranean. Because I don't think Iran from Iranian soil can threaten, with conventional weapons, can threaten Israel quite like Iran can from Lebanon.
So let's move to Gaza and what is going on there. So the president said before he came, he said that he thought the occupation of Gaza was a bad idea. Then Antony Blinken said in a cabinet meeting, the American politicians are sitting in our centers of decision-making, and he sat there for 7 hours, and he insisted that Israel open a so-called humanitarian corridor and allow humanitarian aid. Joe Biden came here, and this was his main point. He got an agreement from Benjamin Netanyahu that aid would enter Gaza only from Egypt and from the south, and nothing from Israel. But still, what Biden did is he broke the siege, right? Israel's position was, so long as you're holding our hostages, you get no humanitarian aid, you get no water, no electricity, nothing that we can deprive you of, we won't give you. And now Biden has broken that, hasn't he?
Yes, he has. And it didn't escape my notice that he's on exactly the same page as the president of Iran about the need for humanitarian, quote unquote, humanitarian aid to go to Gaza through Egypt. I say quote unquote because I fully expect Hamas to use that, and they're going to use it in any number of ways to their advantage. Not that the people of Gaza don't need food and water, but I think that there needs to be a concerted international message to the Gazans, Hezbollah, and Iran that just what you were talking about a second ago, using civilians as human shields is completely unacceptable, and we're not sending that message.
Let's listen to Caroline Glick. I spoke with her this morning about the aid that America is pressuring Israel to give Gaza. Shalom, Caroline.
Shalom, Gadi.
So what's your view of the Biden sudden visit in Israel?
Well, I got a lot of views. I'll just share one insight to what he did. I mean, it was a very hostile visit that was wrapped up and covered with this saccharine prose of solidarity with Israel. But you have to understand that integral to the doctrine of all the terrorist organizations, all the jihadist organizations that fight against Israel, Hamas, Hezbollah, Islamic Jihad, PLO, all of them use information operations in collusion with the West. So what happened here is that the first stage of their assault is always physical, so they attack Israel with missiles, or obviously October 7th was a completely singular event, unprecedented in the atrocity. They invaded Israel, they slaughtered our people, and committed the kinds of war crimes that the human mind simply can't even think of. But now they're back at stage 2 now. That's where they are. So they did that. They're holding our hostages, and their stage 2 of their war is an information op that's designed to do 2 things. One is to get resupply, and the other one is to restrain Israel so that we don't defeat them. So Biden came in and he did 2 things vis-a-vis Hamas. He restrained Israel. First, we know that he restrained Israel because it was widely reported. We were supposed to have invaded Gaza already on Tuesday with our ground offensive, and it was all postponed until after Biden left. And apparently he's continuing to restrain Israel because in remarks to the media on Air Force One, he was asked whether now that he was here, are the chances of a ground invasion diminished? And he said, well, we're looking at a lot of different options. They're all under discussion between our people and our military people and their military people, which meant, obviously, what the message that he was telegraphing very clearly in that statement was that the United States is continuing to sit on Israel to try to block us from invading Gaza. And the other aspect, of course, was that he coerced Israel very publicly and very proudly that we have to resupply Gaza under the euphemistic term of humanitarian aid, which is a complete lie. Everybody knows it's a lie because Hamas controls every square centimeter of Gaza and also controls the inspections. So any truck that comes into Gaza is inherently a tool of war, because a truck is a tool of war. And then any cargo inside of those trucks, whether they're missiles or their baby formula, is all going to be used to assist Hamas's war effort against Israel. And the second thing, of course, that he did was that he promised that American taxpayers are going to give Hamas another $100 million in humanitarian relief. So the whole visit was completely in consonance with stage 2 of Hamas's war plan, of the terrorist war plan always against Israel. So you attack Israel, and then you sit back and wait for the West to restrain Israel and to resupply you. And that's precisely what Hamas accomplished with Biden's visit. We just didn't see it because he was so busy telling us how much he loves us and that he was standing with us, and how sad it was that Moses died. And so that was kind of how it was wrapped up in a bow, but the present was to Hamas.
Caroline Glick has a show. It's called the Caroline Glick Show. For further analysis, check her out. We'll put a link under this video. Mike, can't we say then that the Biden administration is basically blocking any path that Israel might have to a decisive victory? Biden is against reoccupying the Gaza Strip. He's providing aid where we were warned to keep civilians out of harm's way, even if they hide weapons among civilians. So and we can't preempt Hezbollah. So basically, Israel's weakest adversary has just wreaked havoc in Israel with these horrors that we haven't seen since the Holocaust, burning of young children alive, beheading babies, and Israel is just shooting at buildings because we still employ those warning systems. So the end of all this would be that Israel will not have a clear victory, and that would send a signal to all our other stronger adversaries that the Israeli lion is toothless.
Well, that would be the worst case scenario for sure. And I would say Carolyn's presentation, which was extremely clear and persuasive in many respects, I'd say it's one voice in my head. But I have other voices in my head as well. It's dangerous, of course, to have multiple voices.
Yeah, I was going to suggest a doctor.
But that's your role that you play for me, Gadi. Right? You're my support network, my therapy. Yeah. No, look. One can imagine a multi a
multi-stage.
stage.
I'll help you with English.
It's ridiculous. A multi-stage process of achieving this goal, much like the one that Ariel Sharon carried out against Yasser Arafat over time. I don't think we have to say Zbang Gamarnu, just one big blow and it's all over. I think the Israelis, the leadership, and the public understand in the depths of their souls, they understand how important it is to have a victory here for exactly the reason that you said. This is the weakest element in the Iranian network, and it just dealt with the worst blow in your history. Yes.
Blood in the water in a region full of sharks, and our American allies are actually not just giving us a bear hug; they're holding us in a double Nelson. Is that an expression in English?
Yeah, it sounds like one. I'm not sure what a double Nelson is. Full Nelson is full Nelson, right? Did you say double Nelson?
Full Nelson? Yeah. I said sure, full Nelson. Yeah.
Full Nelson. I'm not sure what a half Nelson is though. Oh yeah, no, this is a full Nelson. That's a half Nelson. You're taking me back to teenage years. Anyway, you and I wrote an article in Haaretz, back in Haaretz. You remember that newspaper, Haaretz?
Yeah, before they canceled me for supporting the reform.
Before you were canceled, before your work to destroy democracy, we wrote an article together where we told the Israelis that the Biden administration has this pro-Iran orientation, this desire to reach an accommodation with Iran, and it is coming at the expense of Israel, and Israel has to fight it. It has to have a mentality like Ben-Gurion had in the back of the time of the white paper, back under the British mandate, when the British were restricting, I know you know this, I'm just saying for the viewers who don't know their history of Zionism, the British were restricting immigration of Jews to Palestine, and then the war broke out, and Ben-Gurion famously said, we're going to fight the white paper as if there was no war, and we're going to fight the war as if there is no white paper.
The white paper being the limitation on immigration.
Being the limitation on the immigration. The Israelis today have to develop a similar mindset. They say we're gonna fight the American tendency to accommodate Iran at our expense, and we're going to fight the war as if there is no war with Hamas, and we're going to fight the war with Hamas as if there is no American policy to reach an accommodation with Iran. Do you see what I mean? There's a contradiction here. What you have to do is you have to live with the contradiction in American policy. American policy today, Biden policy, with the left hand, they're building up Iran. They're strengthening Iran economically and allowing it to move closer to a nuclear weapon, but also increase its defense industrial capacity to build conventional weapons. And then with their right hand, in your part of the world, they're trying to counterbalance and constrain Iran somewhat. This won't work. It's pathological. They themselves have not woken up. The Biden administration, they have not woken up to the pathology at the heart of their own policy. They're not doing this because they're hostile to Israel. They're not doing this because they are perverse. They actually think they're being really clever and wise. And so it's up to you to convince them otherwise, and it can't be done in a day.
I'm not sure convince is the right word. We also discussed this when we were discussing the Gantz-Lapid government, which tried to persuade America to wean it off its Iranian illusions by getting closer to it. And I think part of what Israel should do is it should embarrass the Biden administration regarding its Iran policy.
Yes. Well, you have to persuade it by action. You have to take actions that it's hostile to, and then when it shows its hostility, you reveal that to the world, because your supporters in the United States don't think that the administration has a pathological policy.
But I'll
you
tell
have
you
to-
what's going on in Israel. What's going on in Israel is that now American has made this show of friendship and force, and a large segment of the Israeli security establishment is saying, don't fight with the Americans. Don't do anything that will irritate them because we are so dependent on them. So
Well,
they,
here's yes,
so this
yeah,
is the other side of the
but
full
here's where
Nelson.
here's where you and I this is why Carolyn Glick's voice is just one voice in my head, right? There's the other voice which says, I don't know what the IDF has planned in Gaza, right? Maybe the plan that they have that's been delayed a little bit by Biden's visit, maybe maybe it is not in any way impaired by the restrictions that the Americans are putting on them right now. We don't know what they exactly intended to do. So let's wait a little bit. Let's withhold judgment. Well, you and I have time for a long discussion about this. And I'm not hostile to the point of view that you're expressing and that Carolyn is expressing. Far from it. I've been saying very similar things myself all along. This is a very, very crucial moment. This is an existential fight that Israel's in, has to fight it very intelligently. It has to balance a lot of different forces at the same time. There may be elements of what the United States is doing right now that can be valuable to Israel that we don't necessarily know about. I'm just trying to be, I don't want to be one of these guys who has his pet takes on things and pushes them no matter what. I'm gonna wait a little bit. I'm gonna give them a little bit of space. I'm not with Bret Stephens. I don't think that this was a Churchillian moment. I don't believe that. But I want to see what happens on the ground in Gaza before I start crying foul.
Well, crying foul, if I can continue, and maybe you can close this item with that. If I can continue the same line, I would say that Carolyn struck a chord in me when she said this was a hostile visit. Clearly, Biden is in an election year. He does not want to appear to be doing what he is actually doing to Israel. And therefore, it is important for the Jewish community, it is important for us to say out loud that this is a hostile policy. Apparently, we're not alone.
Gadi, my brother. Gadi,
Yeah.
my brother. Listen to what you just said. Listen to what you just said. It's an election year. The United States is a pro-Israel country. And that's not just among the Jews or among the Democrats or Republicans. There are lots of Democrats, there's some Democrats, there are lots of independents, and there are a ton of Republicans who support Israel. That is a card that Israel can play. So does Israel need to play it today? When the first steps are already in Gaza are not going to get, it doesn't need to play it today. It's a card to play. So we don't have to start this campaign in that manner yet.
Not everyone agrees with you. One example is Ron DeSantis, for obvious reason. Let's listen to what he has to say.
Joe Biden just announced $100 million of your taxpayer dollars going to the Gaza Strip. They say it's humanitarian assistance. We know Hamas is going to commandeer that money, and Hamas is going to use it to advance terrorism. I say no U.S. tax dollars to the Gaza Strip. We still have hostages being held by Hamas. There are American hostages being held by Hamas. How are you funding them when they're holding Americans as well as others hostage?
Well, I agree with DeSantis. This is good, and this actually makes my point. It's that there's a lot of support for Israel. There's a lot of voices that are going to be listening. Biden is going to feel heat from the right and from within his own party about any effort to constrain Israel. So I just don't think that things are quite as dire yet as Carolyn made it sound. Let's wait a little bit. I'm going to withhold judgment a little bit.
We have time. We have another episode on Sunday, and you can take the weekend for remorse, Mike, and for contemplation and how do you say atonement? Last topic on our agenda. As Biden is here, the exact date when the restrictions that the JCPOA had on Iran's missile and drone program have been lifted.
This is a huge story that got no attention, because the UN Resolution 2231. This is from 2015. This is the one that endorsed the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal. It scheduled a bunch of lifting of sanctions over the course of the following 15 years after the beginning of the deal. And according to that schedule, this week, the restrictions on Iran buying and selling ballistic missiles and drones was ended. And one of the big stories of the last year has been the rise of Iran's disruptive military capabilities, their conventional military capabilities, missiles and drones. These have made a difference in Ukraine. They've made a difference in the balance of power in the Middle East. They made a difference in the conflict with Hamas just now. You remember we all saw the quadcopter that dropped the RPG on the Israeli tank. So these capabilities that Iran has are changing the whole landscape of the Middle East. This was one instrument that we had for constraining Iran and for preventing it from helping to prevent it from developing its defense industrial base to become a very serious arms exporter. And it was lifted because the alternative is to go to snapback at the UN to put all of the restrictions back on Iran, and for the United States and its allies then to be in a conflict with Iran, and that's what the administration doesn't want. And there's the pathology. That's the heart of the pathology that we're talking about.
I was going to say that the Iranians are masters of brinkmanship, but brinkmanship doesn't quite capture it because they've learned that they can not just cry for the destruction of the United States, they can actually hit American soldiers with impunity.
My friends Ruel Gerecht and Ray Takei, they write articles periodically in the Wall Street Journal about Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran, and they always talk about what's my one argument I have with them, with my friends. They always talk about what a strategic genius he is, and I actually don't think he's a strategic genius. I think the United States policy, because it's pathological, because the right hand is building him up while the left hand is pretending to restrain it or half-heartedly restraining it. Because of that, he looks like a strategic genius. It's really his power is built on the faults of American policy rather than on his great wisdom. Now, having said that, the Iranians have lots of talents. They're very talented people. These disruptive military capabilities they've come up with are extremely intelligent. But if we put our minds to it, we can foil them.
So before we end, let me. This was not on our lineup, but let me end on a positive note and
you're calling an audible. You know what that means?
No, I don't.
In football, they line up you line up the two sides at the beginning of a play, and the quarterback calls out he calls out numbers which to tell his teammates what's going on, and he can change the play in the middle of the play while he sees what the defense is doing, and he changes the play that they all think he's about to run.
Mike,
audible. I don't know why did I even read it? I don't even follow this. I don't even follow football. I didn't know why I brought it up. But
I did a full graduate program, a PhD program in American history, and they kept telling me you have to understand baseball and you have to understand football. And I went through the whole program without that. So I hope.
Well, you and I have this. You and I have this in common. I'm an American. I'm
But
an American.
aren't they saying that in order to understand American internal policy, you need to understand baseball, and if you want to understand foreign policy, you need to understand football?
I'm telling
No?
you, I don't know what they're saying. I can't speak about it intelligently. I'm like a space alien. I grew up in this country. I grew up in Indiana, which is basketball crazy. You know, a small town in Indiana. Everyone in the town would go on Friday nights to go watch the basketball games at the high school, even if they didn't have kids in the high school. And then they would also go to watch football during football season. Despite growing up in that environment, or maybe because of it, I was never interested. Baseball and football bore me. They're incredibly boring.
And yet you played water polo.
Yeah, water polo is exciting.
Yeah,
water polo is a man's sport.
to the players apparently. But what I wanted to tell you has more to do with the one sport I do follow, which is UFC, MMA, and the spirit among Israeli soldiers and the morale is extremely high. While we don't yet understand how much the leadership has synced with the historical moment, the general population in Israel understands that we are facing something like the War of Independence. This is our second war of independence, and people are taking it extremely serious. We don't have time for this on this show, but I sent you one of the heroic stories of a tank driver who fought alone inside a burning tank against a bunch.
I read that. I read that. What an amazing story. We should put it in the, can we, does Rumble have comments like YouTube? Can we put that in there?
I'll certainly check it out, and I'll have that piece translated, because this is
so dramatic.
This is the spirit, and it harks back to a war you know very well, Mike, because you just wrote about it, the Yom Kippur War. So you remember Koach Tzvika. Tzvika received a Medal of Honor because basically alone he pretended to be a tank brigade and held up the front by making a lot of noise, a lot of smoke, talking to himself on the radio, moving from one hill to the other. So we have heroic stories like this, and the actual soldiers are infused with a spirit that this is the war of good against evil, and they're fighting it with wholeheartedly and without a doubt. And like Israel and like Golda Meir said, we have a secret weapon. We have no choice. So
let me respond to this in one way.
Yeah,
because I think this helped me. You've helped me to express what I was trying to say before, I think not very articulately. Think about, I agree this is an existential moment. I agree it is like a second war of independence. I'm very happy to hear that the average Israeli gets that in his or her gut. Think about the War of Independence. The War of Independence had at least 3 different distinct stages to it, went over a long period of time. Different fronts became active at different moments, and the international restraints on Israel shifted in different ways at different times.
America participated in an arms embargo against Israel at that point.
America participated in an arms embargo. America put lots of pressure on Israel in a variety of ways. So did the British, put enormous pressure on Israel. So you don't have to think of it as we've got 4 days for this to end and it's over. And I keep hearing the IDF commanders say this is going to be a long conflict. This is going to be a long conflict. So I just want to give them, these are men and women who are under enormous pressure now, enormous difficulties. They screwed up for sure. They all are aware of it. They're all aware that when this conflict ends, their careers are over. Everyone at the top knows
commanders,
that.
The commanders.
Yeah, they all know that, and they're going to try to do their best in these circumstances. So I just want to give them a little bit of room to a little bit of freedom of action to deal with these difficult constraints.
Mike Doran, Hudson Institute, thank you very much for this. We will reconvene in a few days. Thank you all for staying us and watching this this show. We'll keep you posted on many things that the mainstream media does not talk about. That's all from us for today.